Now that we got the server side up and running, what we want to do is we want to actually utilize the routes that we created inside of our application. So when we click sign up, we should make that request to that /sign up route. If we click login, we should make a request to that /login route. So let's just go ahead and do that right now. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is just close everything in here. And we're going to go to our client. So we're going to go to our client. Specifically, we're going to go to our modal.tsx. And remember, our modal.tsx is the thing that we're going to be utilizing in order to sign in or log out. So what we can do here, because this modal is handling both logging in and signing up, is we can actually pass in a prop calling isSignUpFlow. And this could be a Boolean value. So if it's signing up, then what we want to do is, well, we want to call the /signup route. However, if it's logged in, then what we want to do is we want to call the login route. So let's go here, let's take out that prop. And now what we can do is go to our app.tsx. Let's go to our hero. And then in here, we can say is sign up. For this is sign up, so we can say true. We also could have utilized the text, but whatever, we'll use this too. And we'll say false for this. All right, cool. So now what we can do is we can go to our modal. And inside of our modal, what we want to do is when we click this button over here, we want to make that HTTP request. So let's add an on click here. And this click is going to call a function called handle click. So let's go here. And let's say const handle click. It's going to be an arrow function. And then over here, well, what we want to do is we want to check, well, is it sign up or is it login? So you can say if is sign up flow is true, then what we want to do is we want to make a HTTP request to /sign up. Now, in order to make HTTP requests, let's install a library called Axios. So we're going to go here, go to our client, we're going to do npm install Axios. This is a very popular library in order to make HTTP requests. So then what we can do is we can get Axios from Axios once it installs. There we go. And then over here, what we can do is we can do Axios dot, and then we can do Axios dot post. And then remember the request is sign in or sign up rather. So we can go here. We can say that this is the URL for the request that we want to make. Now, of course, what we want to do is we want to also pass in the email and the password. Now, right now, we're not really storing the email and the password that we get from the input anywhere. So what we can do to fix that issue is have a bunch of use state hooks over here. So we can do two-way binding for this. So we can say email and then set email. And then over here, we can say password. We can say set password. And then over here, what we can do is on the form control, what we can very simply do is say that the value of this is the email. And we can say when we change this, we want to call a function. So on change, we want to call a function where we get the event handler and we want to set the email to e.target.value. This is basic event handling in React. I do expect you to know this, even if you don't come from a React background. If you come from Vue or Angular, this is kind of similar to like the v-bind syntax. So this is a very common syntax. So let's see what's going on here. It seems to be yelling. Okay, the reason for that is over here, we should set this to an empty string initially. All right, cool. Now let's go over here. Let's go to here. Let's just paste that in there. Instead here, we're gonna say set password, and we're gonna say password. Save that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make this request, and we're going to give them the email and the password. Now the password can be completely invalid. The email can be completely invalid. It'll be handled in the backend. All right, so that's the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make this request. However, if this is a login request, what we can do is have an else statement. And then in here, we can have /login instead. Okay, awesome. So what we're going to do eventually is we're going to get back some data from this. So what we can do here is we can say let data. We're going to say let data over here. And for now, we're just going to keep this with the any type. And then over here, what we're going to do is we're going to get back some data. So let's actually just look at exactly what we get back. So we can just say something like response is equal to await. So this is going to be asynchronous. So let's also async this. And then over here, let's do another response is equal to await. So let's take a look at what we get back. So let's try to sign up and let's console.log the response. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to inspect this console. I'm going to go to sign up. I'm going to try to sign up with these credentials, whatever. So sign up. And if I were to sign up, seems like nothing occurs. Let me quickly refresh. Sometimes you might have to refresh. You sign up. Okay. So this was an expected error. So right now what we're getting is we're getting a CORS error. So this is a cross origin, forget what the RS stands for, but essentially what we can do to kind of bypass this is we need to go into our server. So we need to go to our server. And then inside of our server, what we need to do is we need to go to our index.ts. And inside of our index.ts, we need to configure that this client, this one over here, is allowed to make requests to this server. That's the only issue. This is the CORS, the very common CORS issue. Now, in order to do this, what we need to do is to install a particular package that allows us to kind of configure this. So what we're going to do is we're going to, of course, open up our terminal as per usual. And then we are going to install the CORS package. So let's move out of our client directory. Let's go to our server. And we're going to do npm install CORS. Now, right now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here. We're going to say CORS from CORS. And now to say, I guess we also need the types as well. So let's do that as well. Say @types /CORS -- save -dev. All right, so now that we got that, so now what we can do is we can say that, hey, we can say that, well, we want our client to be able to get access to the server. In order to do this, what we can do is right below the express.json, we can add app.use, and then we can say CORS. And this is basically saying that whatever client it is that we want can connect to the server. Probably not the best thing. We can actually, it might be better to actually specify exactly what client is allowed to have access to our server. But, you know, for the sake of this application, we'll just keep it as is. All right, so let's make this request again. And now we actually get back our data. So you can see here, we get back data. So now we're trying to sign up. And if I were to go over here, you can see I get back this token, I get back this user, I get 0 errors. Now let's try to sign up again, actually. And now I get back this data, but this time I get null for the data, and then I get errors, I get emails already in use. Okay, cool, so that's awesome. So this seems like it's working. So what we can do is we're getting back data, and then over here we have this other thing called data. So what we can do is we can actually extract out. We can extract out from our MongoDB. So instead of just getting the response, we can just get back the data. You can just say something like, we can recall this something like sign up data. And then over here, what we can do is we can say that So over here we can do that, and then over here we can do the exact same thing for the login, because we're going to get pretty much the exact same response. So we're going to say login data. All right, cool. So I hope that makes sense. So now what we want to do is we want to get this data, of course, and put it inside of this variable. So now what we're going to say is we're going to say data is equal to sign up data. So sign up data, and then over here, data is equal to login data. Okay, so now that we have this data, we've hit these if blocks. We either got error or we got the actual data in here. Now what we want to do is we want to check if we got any errors. If we got any errors, we want to throw up an error. And this should be login data here, or data is equal to this. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is, remember how our data is going to be looking. It's going to have this data property, and it's going to have an errors. So we're going to check if we have any errors. If we have errors, then we're just going to display an error onto our screen. So in order to do this, what we're going to say is if data.errors.length, and what we're going to do is we're very simply just going to get the very first element inside of our array, and we're going to display the message for that error. So what we can do here is we can actually have another piece of state called show error. We can over here say, or maybe over here we can call this error, just error, simply error. We can over here call this set error. Maybe even to be more descriptive, you can say set error message. Over here we can say error message. Then we can say that this is equal to use state and an empty string. All right. So now, why is it yelling at me? So now what we can do is we can set error message to data.errors. Again, we get the very first element and we get the message of this. So now what we can do is all the way at the bottom, maybe right over here, we can say, okay, well, if error message is truthy, then what we want to do is we want to, let's go over here, let's create another component here. So we're going to say const error message is going to be equal to styled dot, let's do a p tag here, and let's import styled from styled components. And over here, let's just give it a color of red. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to display this error saying whatever the error message is. Okay, cool. So let's actually give this a quick go again. Let's give it a quick refresh. Let's try to sign up with the same credentials. We get this. Wow, that is hideous. Okay, but we're getting some actual real valid errors, which is good. Let's just fix the look of this a little bit. Maybe if we put this in the body, let's put it right here. Okay, you know what? That looks good enough for me. Email already in use. You guys get the point. If I were to, let's say I were to try to sign up, and I'm trying to sign up with like an invalid email. Invalid email, we get the email is invalid. Let's say the email is valid, and now I'm trying to sign up with the invalid password. I can go here, I get the password is invalid. If I try to log in, oh, I guess this is the actual credentials. Let's try to log in with like invalid credentials. You can see here invalid credentials. Okay, cool. So that's awesome. So now what we're doing is we're error handling, and we're also getting back the token. So let's actually talk about how we're going to deal with that token. But I need a quick break before I do this, so let's just do that in the next section. Whenever we successfully log in or sign up, what we probably want to do is we want to get that token and then store it somewhere inside of our browser. And then what we want to do is we want to redirect them to whatever page we want to redirect them to. In this case, we want to redirect them to the articles page. So let's actually begin with actually getting that token and storing it inside of our client. Now, our browser itself has multiple different ways that it can persistently store things inside of it. If you were to open your Google Chrome extensions over here and you were to go to your application, you can see that there's multiple different ways we can actually store data that is going to persist. We can have cookies, we can have session storage or local storage. For this, we're just going to simply store our token inside of local storage. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to completely get rid of this token, get rid of this token, get rid of this. What I'm going to do is we're going to store it over here as a key value pair. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So once we successfully have gone through this step, then what we're going to do is let's go to handle click and let's go after this else block. So after we go here, what we want to do is we want to do local storage dot set item, and we want to set the token in there. So we can say token is the key, and then the value is going to be data dot token. Very simple. All right, so let's just try to log in again. Let's just do a quick refresh. Let's try to log in with these credentials, and we should see our token in here. And now if we were to refresh, our token should still be in there because this is persistent storage inside of our browser. If we cleared the cache or whatever, then it would be removed, but for now it's going to be persistent. Okay, awesome. So now we were able to store this token inside of our browser. Next step is to navigate the user to the articles page. So right now, what we're doing is we simply just have one page. So what we need to do is utilize React Router DOM to create multiple pages inside of our application. So let's go ahead and do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to move into our client and we're going to install React Router DOM. React Router DOM. So we're going to go ahead and install that. TikTok, let's just wait a little bit until it is done installing. Okay, awesome. It's done installing. So now what we want to do is, well, of course we want to set up React Router DOM. I do expect you to know what this is. This is just a way that we can set up pages and routing inside of our application. Let's get rid of this stuff that we don't use. And then honestly, let's also get rid of the app.css. We don't use that as well. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to import a few things from React Router DOM. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import browser router. We're going to import routes. So we're going to import routes, and then we're also going to import routes. So browser router is the thing that we need to wrap our whole application in order to utilize the React Router DOM library. So what we can do here is we can grab this browser router and just wrap it inside of our whole application. And then over here, what we want to do inside of here, what we want to do is specify all of the different routes. We're going to specify them inside of this routes component that we get from React Router DOM. And so in here, we're going to specify a route. So a route, and we're going to simply say that the path of an empty string, which is going to be the landing page, we're going to give it the element. So we're going to give it the element of, we'll call it landing page. And this is an actual page component. And so now what we can do is very simply, let's go to our source. Let's create a new pages directory. And then inside of that, let's create a landing page.tsx. All right, very cool. So in here, what we can very simply do is just create const landing page is equal to an arrow function. And we're very simply just going to return the hero component. So this hero component, because our landing page only contains the hero component. So let's just go ahead and let's see if we can auto import that in, and we can. And then let's just do an export default of the landing page. So the reason why we are only returning the hero component and not the nav as well as the hero is because we want the nav to appear in every single page. So it's actually living outside of the routes. Sorry, this should be routes, not route. So the routes component, which is going to define all of our pages. Okay, so now let's go here and let's import the landing page and get rid of the hero. We don't need that anymore. And if we were to save this and refresh, everything should be still exactly the same. But now what we can do is we can actually utilize React Router DOM to move our user into a different page. So what we can do here is go to our modal. Let's go to our modal. And then from React Router DOM, let me just clean up my mouse because it's just struggling to move, this stupid magic mouse. What we can do is we can import something from React Router DOM. And we're going to import use navigate. And so this is a very important hook that's going to allow us to navigate between our application. So in here we can say const navigate, and that's going to be equal to use navigate. Or we're going to go ahead and invoke it. Now what we can do is we can actually utilize this function over here at the very bottom, and then simply say navigate, and then we can navigate to the /articles page. So the /articles page. So what we want to also do here is return. So we want to return this. So essentially if we get an error, we don't want to invoke this. However, if we bypass this if statement, then we want to put the token in local storage and then navigate to the /articles page. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's refresh. Let's give this a quick go again. Let's just do a quick refresh here. Let's log in with these credentials, and there we go. Awesome. So, and you can see here that the nav is also present in this page as well. All right, cool. Now, right now this page doesn't really exist, and this is the main reason why we're not seeing anything. But of course, right now we don't have any plans, so we should see kind of an error saying that, hey, you don't have any plans. Go to the plans page. All right, cool, very cool. Also, our navigation isn't working. So when I click home, it's not taking me back to home. So let's quickly fix that right now that we have React Router DOM. So to fix this, let's go to our nav. And here, what we can do is from React Router DOM, we can import this thing called link. And this is a very important component that we can utilize. So inside of the nav link, we can have this link over here. And we can say that this is going to this slash over here. So this is a landing page. Now I actually wonder, let me just do a quick inspect. I wonder if we have an anchor tag inside of an anchor tag in this case. And that's exactly the case. So maybe what we can do instead here is just copy this class, put that in there, and just remove this link right here. So now we just have one anchor tag. All right, cool. And it's, of course, class name. There we go. All right, so now if I were to click back here, we go back home. Okay, cool. So this is awesome. This is really cool. Right now, when we log in, we get redirected to the articles page. And of course, we have nothing in here because we haven't defined anything inside of the articles page. However, right now I want to focus on something else. Specifically, I want to focus in on the nav bar. So let's actually take a quick look at the nav bar. I'm going to quickly zoom in here. So right now, the nav bar only has one tab. However, when I'm logged in, I actually am going to expect that we have two tabs, the home tab, as well as a log out tab that is going to give me the ability to log out. And of course, I only want to show the log out tab when a user is logged in. So we need a way to identify that a user is logged in inside of our React application. And then if they are logged in, we can show different UI elements. So how do we identify if a user is logged in or not? Well, if you remember, let's open up our DevTools. As soon as a user logs in or signs up, what we do is inside of local storage, we store their JSON web token inside of a key called token. So you might be thinking, okay, it might be a good idea to go to local storage, get the value of the token property, and then say, okay, well, if there's something in here, then just show the log out tab. However, if there's nothing in there, well, don't show it because that means they're logged out. Okay, cool. So this seems like a good approach, and let's actually just quickly implement it right now. So right over here, what we're gonna say is local storage. So local storage.getItem. So we're gonna get the value of the token. And if there's actually something in there, then what we want to do is we want to render this nav item. So this nav item, we're gonna call this logout. Okay. However, if there's nothing in there, then that means we're logged out. So we don't want to show the logout nav tab. So you can see here that this works perfectly fine. That's awesome. So this seems to be working. We are authenticated and we should see this. And if we were to remove this token, and we were to refresh, okay, awesome. So now it's not there. That is terrific. Okay, you probably get the problem with this approach. This approach is very, very problematic. Why is that? Well, anybody has access to the Chrome DevTools. Anybody can go to their local storage, add a key called token, and put in some random gibberish. And even though this is not a valid JSON web token. Now, if they were to refresh their page, now they have access to this logout tab or any other UI elements that you only want authenticated users to see. So this approach is definitely not a good one, and we are not going to be taking this approach to identify our users. So what are we going to do instead? Well, we're going to utilize our backend. Where is my Canva? Right here. We're going to utilize our backend to do this. So this is going to be the most secure because the client, any user can manipulate the client in any way, but they cannot manipulate our server. Our server is completely isolated from the client. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a majority of the authentication steps right over here, the validation steps right over here inside of our server. So what are we going to do? Well, our client, as soon as we open this page, as soon as we open our website, we're going to go to our local storage and grab the token if it exists. If it exists, we're going to go ahead and make a request to the server with this token. We're going to make a request to the server with this token. The server is going to verify the token. Remember, with JSON web token right over here, we need to verify the token. And then it's going to take, once it verifies it, it's going to take the payload that we applied over here, which is the email. It's going to find whatever user has that email and it's going to send back those credentials. And this ensures that we are really logged in. And this is the approach that we are going to take. But before we do that, we first have to talk about exactly how we're going to be sending this token from the client to the server. You might be thinking that, well, this is kind of a stupid question. We've been sending data from the client to the server by utilizing, if I go all the way over here, by utilizing the request body. Well, for the token itself, this isn't a really good idea. The request body should be reserved for data that is specific to that route. So this token isn't really specific to that particular route. So how are we going to send this instead? Well, there's multiple ways we can send data from the client to the server. It doesn't just have to be the body. The most common way of sending the token from the client to the server is by using the request header. So if we actually go all the way over here, we can see here that we have this headers option, and it's actually a key value pair. So we can have a key of authorization and then a value of our token. And the common convention for sending our token is going to be bearer, space, and then our token. This doesn't really do anything special. It's just a very common convention of sending tokens from client to servers. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing. And so for every single route that we hit, we're going to be sending this token inside of our request header. So for example, we're going to have a me route that is going to identify who we are. And this is going to be a protected route. You can only hit this route if you are logged in. If you're not logged in, you should not be able to hit this route. So what this route is going to do is it's going to take the token, it's going to take this token, it's going to verify it. So remember, the tokens, they have to be verified with this portion right over here. Then it's going to extract the payload from this token. it's going to go ahead and maybe make a fetch for that particular user with that email, and then it's going to return that back to the client. So every single authenticated route is going to go through these same steps. So for example, we might have the articles, and this is also going to be an authenticated route. And then over here, we might have, /sessions to create a Stripe session. And this also is going to be authenticated route. So you have to be logged in to hit this. So in order to accomplish this, what we would have to do, if you want to hit the /articles and get the articles, what you would have to do is inside of this route, you would have to, again, extract the token, verify it, extract the payload, fetch the user, and then you can perform whatever logic it is that you want. So the only issue with what we're doing right now is we're really replicating our code throughout every single authenticated route. Wouldn't it be great if we can somehow identify which routes are authenticated, and then we can run some sort of function that does the verification step and the extraction step? Well, there actually is. So for all of our authenticated routes, what we can do is we can define something called a middleware. And this middleware is going to essentially intercept the request, and it's going to perform some logic. And then if everything is all fine and dandy, it's going to take that request and then send it to whatever route that we want to send it to. So for example, if we want to go to the /articles, what we can do is we can send that request. It's going to first go to this check authentication middleware. And this middleware is going to, again, extract the token, verify it, and then it's going to get this user and is then going to say, okay, well, everything is fine. This person is logged in. Let's relay that request to the /articles route. However, if this person is not authenticated, what it can do is it can say, no, I'm not going to relay this. I'm going to go ahead and throw an error to the client, telling the client that, hey, this person is not authenticated. So essentially, if we ever actually end up just hitting this route, we know we're authenticated because we have this middleware. So that's exactly what we're going to be implementing inside of this section of the video. So let's go ahead. I hope that makes it clear to you guys. Authentication is kind of a notoriously difficult thing to implement, but hopefully these diagrams make everything clear. All right, so where were we? Let's go to our code. We have so many tabs open. Let's get rid of this gibberish. And right now we're going to very simply work with the client or with the server for now. So let's go here. Let's go to our server. So we're gonna go to the auth, because this is, at the end of the day, it is going to be an auth route. And let's create that me route. So we're gonna create that me route. So let's go here. Sorry, I had to go log back into my notes. So we're gonna go over here. We're gonna say router.get. This is going to be a GET request. We're gonna say /me. And then we're gonna have over here, we're gonna do async rec res. Now remember over here, what we want to do, so let's just go here. Let's just do a res.send me route. And let's go over here. Let's create a new request. Let's save this, save that. And then let's add a request here. And then over here, we can save that. We can go here. And we can just say me, just to see that this works. Okay, so we get the me route. So this works completely fine. Okay, so remember what we want to do is we want to have a middleware in here. So we want to have a check authentication middleware. We only want to run this if we're actually logged in. So let's actually just create the middleware, and then we'll create the logic a little bit later for that middleware. So inside of the source directory, what we can create is a new directory called middleware. So we can create a middleware directory, and then in here I'm going to have a check auth.ts file. So I'm going to have this check auth.ts file. And then right in here, what we're going to do is we're going to create the logic for verifying our token. So let's just get right into that right now. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a function. And this function is going to act very similar to the callback functions that we have over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do export const, and we're going to say check auth, And this check auth middleware is going to be asynchronous. And it's going to take in 3 different things. It's going to take in the, so it's going to take in the request. So remember, the client over here is going to give it the request to the auth middleware. And then it's also going to take the response. So remember, the response, the middleware might be able to just straight out respond to the client. And then it's going to take in another parameter called the next parameter. Okay, so let me just quickly define what's happening here. So the request is the incoming request from the client. The response is just going to give us the ability to respond from the client from the middleware. The next thing is essentially saying that, okay, everything here is fine. I'm going to invoke this next function, which means go to the route handler or the next middleware inside of this route. So it's saying just move on from this and go to the next chain, which could be another middleware or the actual route that we want to hit. Right now we're getting issues from TypeScript because TypeScript has no idea what rec, res, and next is. So in order to fix this, we can just import the types from Express. And let me just get rid of this. We can import over here from Express. We can import the request, the response, as well as the next function. And we can define the types here. So we can do request, response, and the next function. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and save that. And there we go. So now what we want to do is let's just very simply console.log hello. I am a middleware. I know you guys can't see this. And it seems like everything is capitalized, whatever. And then we're going to go ahead and invoke the next function. So what I want to do is I want to utilize this middleware, this check auth middleware inside of this route only. In order to do this, what we need to do is import that middleware. So let's do import. And honestly, you know what? Let's just say check auth and have it auto import. And then what we can do here is in between, where is it? In between the path and the callback function, which is our route, we can specify the check auth middleware. And so what's going to happen is it's going to go in here first, and then it's going to go right over here. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Now, before we actually end up doing this, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and just save this up. So now what we can do is let's just go ahead and let's run this. And it fails. Why? Fails, it fails. Let's run this again. Okay, there we go. So it hits the me route, and then you can see here that it's inside of the middleware. Now what we can do is we can actually say that no, we don't want to hit this next. What we want to do instead is, you know, you're not authenticated, so we're just going to say return, or we can say res.send, you know, something like not authenticated. So now it's not even going to hit that me route. Instead, what it's going to do is if I were to send this off, you can see not authenticated. All right, so that is middleware in a nutshell. So now what we want to do, of course, is we want to identify our user. So let's go ahead and, well, do that right now. So inside of the middleware, we're actually going to want to create the real logic for our middleware. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get the token, and I'm going to get the token from the request header. And this is going to be authorization. So this is going to be the key. We're going to call this authorization. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just console.log this token and maybe even just return it. So we'll do a res.send token just to see if everything works. So let's go into our client. Let's grab a real token. So let's just log in, grab that real token, copy that token. And then in here, we are going to have header. We're going to say authorization. We're going to say bearer, and then we're going to say this token. Okay, cool. So you can see here that now this is actually being sent to our middleware. Awesome, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to, of course, extract the token. So we want to extract this token from this bearer string. So very simply, what we can say is, if the token doesn't exist, what we want to do is we want to just say that you're not authenticated. So we're going to very simply say return res.status. This time we're going to have an actual status. We're going to say 403, meaning that this is forbidden. And we're going to send back some data saying that, the error is you're unauthorized. Unauthorized. So let's just give this a quick go again. Let's just get rid of this. And let's give this a request. You can see here that we get a 403 unauthorized. Now let's go back over here. Let's add that token again. And if you were to send this off again, everything is fine. So if there's no token, you're unauthorized. And now what we want to do is we want to simply split the token. So let's just do a let token here. And we can say let token, and then this is going to be equal to whatever the token is dot split. We want to split it between the space, and we're going to say token, not let token. And then what we want to do is we want to get the second element. So what this is going to do very simply is just split these into two different arrays. So we're going to have bearer in one element, this in the other element, and we're going to get that. So that just allows us to get the token itself. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is, of course, verify this token. So in order to do this, we're going to utilize the JWT package. So from JSON web token. And then in here, what we're going to say is, well, JWT.verify. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually throw an error if our token is invalid. If our token is valid, however, it's just going to extract the payload and give it to us. So what we can do is actually put this in a try-catch block. And we can do JWT.verify. And then over here, what we can do is JWT.verify. And this is going to be asynchronous. So we can simply say const user because we get back the payload. And then we can say await. And then in here, what we can say is, well, we first want to give it the token, and then we want to give it the secret that only our server knows. And remember, this is inside of our process.env.jwt secret. So it's going to verify that our token is actually correct based on the secret that we have inside of our server. So I'm going to say as string. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much all that we need. Now, if we end up actually getting our user, so what I want to do is I want to take the request, I want to set a property on the request. I want to say that the request.user is equal to the user.email. So now if I were to go to this auth route over here, what I can do is simply say rec.user, and that will be the email of that particular user. I won't have access to that in here because I wouldn't have hit the middleware, but over here I can actually get the email and maybe do something with it because again, I am authenticated. Now the issue is in TypeScript, this would be complete, or in JavaScript, this would be completely fine. But because we're doing TypeScript, it's just a little bit more tricky. So if I were to hover over this, it says that user is not does not exist on type this right over here. So basically what it's saying is this user property doesn't exist in the request type that we defined. So what we want to do is we want to just say that this is completely fine, and we want to add this user inside of the request type. So in order to do this, we're just going to have to do a little bit of trickery when it comes to TypeScript. So this is just kind of the annoying part of TypeScript sometimes, but hey, it is what it is. So in here, what we're going to do is very simply, we're going to add an @types directory. And then in here, we're going to have an express directory, and we're going to have an index.ts file in here. So right in here, or actually we're going to call this not index.ts, we're going to call this index.d, because here we're defining some type definition. So index.d.ts. And over here, very simply, what we're gonna say is declare namespace, and we're gonna say express, and over here we're going to do export interface, and then we're going to say request. So this is the request, and we're gonna say that we have a user in there, a user property that has the string. All right, so I hope that's clear. Essentially what we're doing is we're just getting the request type from express, and we're adding this user property that is a string. And we're gonna utilize this to essentially just create the email. Okay, cool. So now what we need to do is to go to our tsconfig file. So inside of our tsconfig file, what we need to do is define, let's go over here. We need to define type roots. And then here we're gonna say @types, so @types, and then over here, we're going to specify the route to that. So we're gonna say node modules /@types. And so this is essentially going to say that we want to add this to the root types inside of our node modules. And now if we were to go here, we still get this error. What is that error? So email. Okay, yeah. So the issue here, so now what we can do is we can actually change this to a string. That's completely fine. But now we're running into a separate issue. And this issue is, hey, this could be string or type JSON. So for this, we can just simply say that this 100% will be a string. And this doesn't actually seem to be working. Let me just quickly check my notes as to how I did this. So let's go here. And over here, okay. So instead here, what we can say is, over here, we can say that, hey, we get back. So what we do is we get back something called email that is a string. And that just fixes that issue. All right, cool. Okay, awesome. So now that we have that try catch, so now what we did is we actually set the rec.user. We have the email in there. You can also call this email if you want, but whatever, that's completely up to you. And then once we do that, we want to execute the next function. Now, if we ever hit this catch block, that means that the token has not been verified. So what we can do very simply is just return this. So we can return the exact same thing. All right, and that's pretty much it. We don't even need this part. So now, even if we send, let's send some gibberish. So let's go ahead here and let's send an invalid token. So let's send whatever this is. At this point, we're unauthenticated. However, if we sent a real token, then we are authenticated and we actually hit that route. And now what we can do again is go here and we can access the rec.user, and the rec.user, send this off again. Wait, why did it fail, or is it still reloading? Let's see. Yeah, I think it was just reloading. Let's send this off. Now you can see we actually get that user's email. So now what we can do in here is very simply just go and just say const user is equal to await user dot find. So find one, and we want the email to be whatever is inside the rec.user. And then over here, what we can say is return res.json. We can say that, sorry about that. You can say this. So we can say errors of nothing. And then the data is gonna be a user, and we're gonna have an email of user.email. Maybe we also want to get their ID. So we can say ID is user._ID. All right, cool. So that's pretty much it. Now, why is this yelling at me over here? Cannot find name errors. Okay, yeah, just TypeScript taking a long time to understand what I want. So now what we can do is, if I were to make this request and wait 1,000,000 years, what is going on? Maybe this time it's actually failing. Okay, let's see why that is. Let's open up our terminal again, close this off. So cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. What is going on here? So, that is a little confusing. I don't really know what. Cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. Well, where are we setting the header here? Okay, I figured out what was wrong. I have this. I'm sending data, and then I'm sending more data. I can't do that. So let's get rid of that. And now what we can do is, if we were to make this request again and wait 1,000,000 years, you can see that we actually get back the correct data and we figure out exactly who we are. All right, so that's pretty much it for the me route. We learned quite a bit about middleware. We also added this so that now we can authenticate all of our routes. So now what we need to do is we need to go back to the client and then handle this data globally inside of our application. Now that we set up the me route, let's go ahead and make a request from the client as soon as this website is rendered. And once we actually get that data, what we want to do is we want to store it globally inside of our client. Therefore, any component that wants access to it, we can quickly give access to. So for example, the navbar or any other components within our application. Now, in order to store our state globally, we can use multiple different approaches. For example, we can use Redux, which is, I think, a bit of an overkill. It's a little bit too complicated. We can use Reducer, which I think also is a little bit overkill. Instead, what we're going to utilize is use context, which I think is probably the simplest way to store global state in React. And it's actually the best way to do it for our problem at the moment. So let's go ahead and use context in order to make that HTTP request, get the data, and then store it in the global state, of course, if we are logged in. All right, so the first thing that we want to do here is let's go to our source directory and let's create a context directory, and then inside of here, an index.ts file. And then here is where we're going to create our context. So remember, the context is just a place where we're going to store our state. So what we can do here is very simply imports something from React, and that something is create context. So create context. And before we actually go ahead and create the context, let's think about how that context is going to look, how that state is going to look. And the best way to do this is by just creating an interface, a TypeScript interface that's going to define how our data, which is going to be our context, is going to look. So what I think is best is to have 3 different properties: data, error, and loading. So so remember, the context is going to be making a request. This is going to take some period of time. And so this is why I think we need loading. And this is going to be a Boolean value, so either true or false. And this is indicative of, hey, something is loading. Now, once we get back a response, we can actually set this loading to be false. And then if we get errors, what we can do here is we can, display those errors. So those errors, we can maybe give them a type of, string. So they're going to be string. However, if we get data, then we don't have any errors, so we don't want to put any string as an error. So we can say string or null. Now the same case goes with data. So data, what we're going to want to get back is an ID, that's a string. We're also going to get back an email, that's a string. However, if we get error and not data, then what we want to do is we want to say, data is null. For example, if we're not logged in, data at this point is going to be null. All right, cool. So that is how we are going to define our data. So let's go ahead and let's create our user context. So we're going to say user context, and then that's going to be equal to create context. So create context. And so right here, we're going to go ahead and invoke this. But what I want to first say is that it's yelling at us for a very particular purpose. We have to define the context initial values or default values before we actually create them. So what we know is, okay, well, what we want is some sort of state that looks like this. But what we also want is the ability to update this state. And actually this state is going to be living inside of a use state hook. And so what we want is, we want this context to have the state of this as well as the ability to update it. So what we can do here is pass in an array, and then inside of the array we can just have this initial state. So initially we're just going to assume that everything is loading. So initially we can simply say that data is null. We can say that loading is true. And then we can also say that error is null. So that's initially what we get here. And then what we can also get as a second parameter, and this should be inside of an object in this array, as a second parameter, what we want is just an empty function. So just an empty function. This is going to be the function that is going to update our state. And we can actually define that inside of the type right over here. So we can have these types right in here. So we can say that we're going to have a user, and then we're also going to have a react.dispatch. We're going to have react.dispatch. And then over here, we're going to have a react.setStateAction. And then here we can have user. And you don't really, I mean, this might be a little bit confusing, but essentially what this is this is the type of a use state hook that has this particular data. All right, so, and this should be capital set. There we go. Okay, cool. So now that we created the context, let's create the provider. So we're gonna say const user provider, and then the provider is gonna be equal to, and then over here we're gonna pass in any children. So these are the children React components. For now, we'll just say that they're any. We're going to go ahead, and in here what we're going to do is we're going to create that use state so we can have that initial state that we created. So in here we're going to say const, and then we're going to say user, and then over here we're going to say set user, and then over here we're going to say use state, and we're going to have the type of user in here, and we're going to have the initial value that we had over here. Okay, let's just save that. Let's save this. We're gonna have this initial value right in here. Okay, and just to let you know that I did kind of come up with this type right out of midair. What I did was I just hovered over this, and I just copied this type right over here. So you can do the same if you want to. You probably already did it. So over here, this is the use state. So this is the current state of our application. And so now what we want to do is we want to fetch. So you want to fetch using that me query. But before we do that, we have to ensure that our token is inside of our header. So let's go ahead over here, and we can say const token. And we can say const token is equal to local storage dot get item, and we can get our token. And then what we could do is we could actually, instead of passing it in manually for every single Axios call that we do, what we can do is actually add this token into every single request by having just one default configuration. So by doing that, what we can do is we can do import Axios from Axios. And then right in here, we can simply do Axios.defaults, and then .headers, and then .common. And then we do our square brackets, and this is going to be the key, authorization. We're going to say that this is equal to template literals bearer, and then our token that we got from local storage. So our token that we got from local storage. Okay, cool. So what this is going to do is it's going to set all of our it's going to set all of the headers, our request headers, to have this. Now we only want to do this if we actually get a token, so we can simply say something like if token, and then we can do that. All right, cool. Awesome, awesome. So now let's go ahead and we're going to actually go up and make that request. So let's create a function called fetch user. And this function is going to, fetch our user. It's going to make that async request. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to get the data. So we're going to over here get the data. We're going to do an await axios.get. And then over here, we're going to do http://localhost. And then we're going to do :880/auth/me. It's going to get whatever user that we are currently in. And that's because we're going to, of course, add the header inside of the request. That's how we're going to identify who we are. And then what we're going to do is, once we get our data back, what we're going to do is, we're going to check if we actually get our data back. So if data.data, and actually let's just make this request just so we can see how this looks. So we're going to say here console.log data, and let's just invoke this. So I'm just going to go here and invoke this. Now, in order to actually set up this context inside of our application, what we need to do at the very bottom is we need to export out the user context as well as the user provider. If I'm going a little bit too fast here, I kind of do apologize. I'm hoping that you know what the context is before you're kind of watching this, or if this is a little bit clearer to you guys. So let's go here, we're going to say the user provider, and then we're going to go ahead and export it out. Now, in order to actually utilize it, what we need to do is we need to go to the app.tsx inside of our application. So the app.tsx, or even actually maybe the index.tsx inside of our application, because this is the root of our application. So let's go here. And then in here, we're going to have to wrap our app with the user provider. So we can very simply, maybe we can even auto import it. So we can say here, user provider. We can auto import that in. And we can wrap our application with that user provider. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. It seems as though everything is fine. Oh yeah, so we're also missing, we have to return some JSX for sure. So let's go over here. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to very simply return the user context dot provider. Then over here, we're going to set the value of this right here. So user and set user. Then we're going to close this off. And then in here, we're going to pass in some children. All right, cool. And so now it seems completely happy. Okay, cool. So let's actually just invoke this inside of a use effect instead of just having it there. So have a use effect in here. We're just going to invoke this once. So we're going to go ahead and call fetch user. All right, cool. So now if I were to try this, we were to console.log. You can see here that we get this data back, so we get no errors and we get the actual user that we want. So this is me. So what I can say here is inside of the fetch user, what I can simply say at this point is, if the data exists, so I can say if data.data and data.data.user. So here I'm saying if, so this whole object is called data. So we can say if data, maybe to make it clear, maybe we can recall this response. So we can say if response.data exists and if response.data.user exists, because remember this could be null, then what we want to do is we want to set our state to be a little bit different. So in here, let's get rid of this console.log. So in here, what we want to do is we want to set user, and we want to set the user to have the data of, we're going to have ID of response.data.user.id. And then we're also going to have the email of response.data.user.email. All right, so that's the data portion of it. TypeScript is yelling at us because, well, loading at this point is going to be false. So loading is false, and then we're going to say here error is null. Error is null. Now, at this point, let's also have an else if block, and we're going to say if response.data and response.data.errors, so it's going to be errors array, and dot length. So we can go ahead over here and do the exact same thing. However, this time what we want to do is we're going to go and we're going to take this. We're going to go here /errors.0.message. We're just going to get the first message and set that as the thing. And data at this point is going to be null. All right, cool. So that pretty much sums that up. So now in here, what we are going to do is inside of the use effect, we're actually just going to make this function call. So we're going to make this function call, and we're only going to make this function call if there is a token inside of our application. So we're going to say if token, if there's no token, there's really no point of trying to fetch the users. We're going to go ahead and fetch this. However, if there isn't, well, we're logged out at this point, so might as well just double check and just set the user to the logged out state. So data is null, we're not loading, so loading is false, and then error is null. So this is probably one of the more confusing parts of this application, but I hope it's relatively clear at this point. Maybe take a quick break and read it over if you're confused. So now that we did this, what we can do is we can actually utilize this context in order to make changes in our application. And let's actually do that in the next section. Let's now utilize that context that we set inside of our nav. So essentially, if we have data, what we want to do is, that means we're logged in and we want to add another nav item saying log out. However, if we don't have that item, then we just want to keep it as is. So in order to access the data from the context, what we're going to need is the use context hook from React. So we're going to need use context from React, and we're also going to need that user context to define exactly what context we want to utilize. So we can simply say here const whatever is equal to, and then we're going to say here use context, so use context. And then we can go ahead here and say user context, and we can just auto import that in. Now remember, what this is going to do is it's going to return an array. So what we can do is we can say that we want to extract the elements from the array. The first element is the user or maybe the data themselves, or we can maybe call this, I don't know, we'll call this user or maybe state. And then over here, the second one is the set state. So over here is the set state. So this is a function that is going to be utilized to change the state. In this, we're probably not going to utilize the set state. Actually, we might when we log out. So actually, we'll keep that in there. And so let's just go ahead and just console.log the state at the moment, just so we can see exactly what we get back. So let's also say that this is inside of the nav, because I'm not sure if we have any other console.logs just lurking around. So we're going to refresh, and you can see here that initially the state is loading, and then once we get back our data, we actually get back some real data. So very simply, all we really have to do is in here, we can just say, well, if we actually get back state.data, meaning we actually get back some data, which means that we have a user, we can simply just render, so we can actually render this element. So we can say here, over here we shouldn't use curly braces, we should use this. We can just render this element, and over here we can very just simply say logout. And I don't want this to be a link. We can actually make this a nav link instead. We can get rid of this, and we can just simply say logout. So log out. All right, cool. So now you can see that we are logged out. Now, if I were to go, or I'm logged in, which means I have this logout tab. So now if I were to go over here to my application, and as you can see here, we have a token and we have, an actual JSON web token. If I were to get rid of this and put any sort of gibberish and refresh, well, now I'm actually not logged in. So now we actually cannot manipulate the UI elements depending on whether we have something in the token or not. It actually has to be a valid token that corresponds to our account. So let's refresh that again. Now we're actually logged in. All right, cool. And that might be really small for your screen, but I'm hoping that you guys actually see this. Okay, cool. So one thing that I want to do is I want to just move this logout tab to be all the way to the right. So that's actually kind of easy. What we can do is we can use just a styled component for this. We can say import styled from styled components. And then what we can do here is we can say left nav container is equal to styled.div. And then in here, we can just simply give this a margin left of auto. All right, so we can give it a margin left of auto. And then what we can do here is very simply just get this container and we can just wrap it across the nav item. So you can wrap that right here. And now this should be all the way to the left. All right, cool. So the last thing that we actually need to do is just to make this logout, well, functional. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's actually going to be really, really easy. So on click, what we want to do is we want to change the state. So we want to change the state of the data to null. And what we want to do is we want to maybe just navigate to any other particular page. So what we can say here is handle logout. We can create this function over here called const handle logout. And then in here, the first thing that we want to do is we want to set the state so that the data is now null. So the data is now null. We also want the loading to be false because we're not loading anything. And then the error to be null because there is no error. So that's the first bit. Then we want to remove that token from local storage. So we're going to say local storage.remove item. We're going to remove that token. And then what we want to do is if you're inside of any page, what we want to do is we want to navigate you to the home page. So from React Router DOM, in order to do this, we can just use navigate like we did before. We can do const navigate is equal to use navigate. We can invoke that. And we can say here navigate back to the home page. And that's it. That's all we have to do. We don't need anything in the back end. We just need to remove the token and we need to just move our application back to the home page. That's all we have to do. So right now, it might be really faint, but I'm in /articles. If I were to log out, now I go back to the home page and that's awesome. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to start actually working on the articles page. So let's actually get into that in the next section. Let's now work on the articles page. So when we go to /articles, we should see something. Now, specifically what I want to work on is if we're not logged in, we actually shouldn't have access to the articles page. So what I want to do is I want to figure out if we're logged in or not. If we are logged in, we should have access to this page. However, we might not have access to specific articles based on our plan. But if we're completely logged out, we should just never enter this page. So if we try to go to /articles, what it should do is just redirect us back to the home page. So what we're going to do is we're going to create protected routes based on whether we are authenticated or not. Okay, so In order to do this, let's just first go to our pages directory. And then in here, we're going to create an articles.tsx file. And this is just simply going to house our article page component. So we can say const article, and then this can be an arrow function, and then this can return, just for now, just an empty div, just saying articles. And actually, maybe we can actually use a container that we get from React Bootstrap, just so it can look a little bit better. Okay, and let's go ahead and export default this. So export default articles. You can call this articles. And now what we can do is we can go to the app.tsx. So inside of the app.tsx, what we can do, wherever that is inside of here, we can create another path. And this path is going to be /articles. And then this is going to take us to the articles page. So we can say articles, and we auto imported it. So now when we log in, we are redirected to this page right over here. Okay, cool. But of course, if we're not logged in, and where's the logout option actually? I'm a little surprised here. Okay, so we actually have another issue here. When we log in, we actually don't see that logout tab. And the reason for this is we have to actually add some logic inside of the modal. So let's go, I guess we're going kind of a segue here, but let's just quickly fix that issue right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the modal in here, and then we're going to add some logic inside of this modal. So inside of this modal, what we wanna do is when we log in, we want to set the context. So we want to set the context to the user that we are logged in as. So let's actually go ahead and let's do that right now. This is gonna be relatively simple. So let's go here. We're gonna say import, and we're going to import use context from React. Now, are we getting anything from React here? Yes, we are. So we can just very simply go here and just get use context. All right. So right in the handle click, we're going to change a little bit of our logic. So inside of the handle click, what we also want to do is go over here, and we want to get const. We want to say state, set state, and then over here, we're gonna say that that is equal to the use context, and we're gonna call the user context. All right, cool. So right in here, what we want to do is we also want to set the state. So we can very simply say here set state, and then we can say that the data is going to be equal to the ID. And then over here, we can say that this is going to be data.user.id. And then here, we're going to say email. And then this is going to be data.data. Maybe it'll be more clear if you can just call this response. So response here, response here, response here, response here, response here, and then here what we will say is response, and then response, and then here also response, just so we can make it more clear. We're getting the response.data.user.id, response.data.user.email, so that's the data. And then for loading, we'll set that to false, and then for the error, we have none, so null. Okay, and that's pretty much all that we need to do. The other thing is, if we ever hit this state, we also want to set the Axios header to have our token. So we also want to do that as well. So we can very simply say here axios.defaults.header.common. And we're going to say here authorization. And we're going to say that that is equal to bearer. And I think this should be headers, bearer, and then $, curly brace, and we're gonna say response.data.token. Remember, because here we get the token back. All right, cool. So why is this giving me an error? So we're saying, okay, now it's fine. All right, so that fixes that kind of issue. If we were to log out now and try to log back in, now we get everything up and running. Okay, cool. So now that we got that out of the way, let's actually figure out how we can protect routes. So in order to protect routes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a protected routes component. So in here, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call this routes. I'm going to say this is a protected route.tsx. So protected route.tsx. And then inside of this protected route, we're going to create a very simple component. So let's go ahead and let's just do an export const. We're going to say protected route. And that is going to be equal to, so that's going to be equal to some arrow function. And then very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to get the state from the user context. So we're going to get the state from the user context. And this state over here is just going to indicate whether we are logged in or not. So we're going to say the first thing that we want to do is we want to check if the state is loading. So if it is loading, then what we want to do is just very simply for now, just return some spinner, because we could hit a point where we are loading. So we want to just hit a spinner, because if we're loading, the data at this point is null. And if we check if the data is null and just say that, hey, you're not protected, well, that might not be the case because we just might be loading at this point. However, if we actually have data, so if we're not loading and we have data, then what we want to return is something called outlet. And I'll explain exactly what this is a little bit later. But if that's not the case, then what we want to do is we want to return another component called navigate. So this is very similar to the use navigate hook, but it's a component that's just going to navigate to a particular page. We can get this from React Router DOM. So over here we can say that we want navigate. So navigate. And over here what we're saying is this is a component that is going to navigate to, so it's going to be a component that's going to navigate to the slash page, which is the landing page. And that's all we have to do for our protected route. So now in order to utilize this inside of our app.tsx, all we have to do is simply import protected route. Let's just go ahead and import that. Protected route. Did that get imported? Come on, get imported. There we go. So we're going to get protected route, and then we're going to wrap. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this right here, so this route that we want to protect, with another route. So we're going to say route, and we're going to have, and this is not going to be a self-closing one, so we're going to have route, and then over here we're going to wrap it inside, and then we're going to have the exact same path. So we're going to say path articles, but this time the element is going to be equal to the protected route. So protected route. So we can go ahead and save that. Now I'll explain exactly what's going on here in a second, but let's try to log out. So now we're not logged in, and let's go over here and let's go to /articles, and you can see that it's not letting us. So you can see that we don't have access to /articles. So let's just quickly explain what's going on here. So what we did was we created this thing. So if we are loading, we're just going to return a spinner. And so very simply, we can log in just to really see that. So if I were to go over here, and now at this point I am logged in. I do have a token inside of my local storage. And if I were to very quickly go to articles, you'll see you might have seen a very quick spinner, and then it showed us our page. So this is just a loading state. Now over here, if we actually have data, which means that we're logged in, what we want to do is we want to return outlet. An outlet is very simply a component that is going to return the child that is inside of that route. So for example, over here, inside of app.tsx, we're wrapping this route with another route. And if this ultimately just simply returns outlet, then it is going to utilize this route, which is the child. So it's basically saying that, hey, just utilize whatever child is inside here. However, if we don't have any data, which means we're not logged in, we want to utilize this navigate component that we get from React Router DOM that's going to navigate our page to the slash. So I think this one makes a little bit more sense. It was just the outlet that was a little confusing. Okay, cool. So I hope that makes sense. And now we got protected routes. So now that we got protected routes, well, now what we want to do is, this is where the actual action and the fun part gets in. So now what we want to do is we want to start creating our plan. And so we're going to need to interact with Stripe to do this.